Next up, we have a very, very cool discussion between Whitney, Beatty from Josephine and Billie's, one of my favorite brands in the cannabis space, and my very good friend, Helene Sevillion.
Thank you, thank you. Hello?
Is that on? Yep.
Can you hear me?
There you go.
Awesome. All right, who has digested their food? We're going to give you another good meal. This conversation with the beautiful Whitney Beatty, best dressed person in the house. Please own it because you deserve it. And the founder and CEO of Josephine and Billie.
Yes.
So, I mean, to kick things off, let's hear the heritage story about how you got into the cannabis industry, and would love to understand more about what you're building.
Oh, how I got into the cannabis space. It's actually interesting because I did not see myself in this space. If you came to me 10, 12 years ago and said I would be working in cannabis, I would have said that you are on something that was not cannabis. My background is in the entertainment industry. So I have my master's in film production, and I worked for 16 years as a development executive. My last job was as Senior Vice President of Development at Warner Brothers Telepictures. I developed day part syndication and reality TV. And the way that I got into the cannabis space is I had a situation where I was sitting at my desk at work and I had heart palpitations. I had weakness in my arm. I was sweating profusely. I thought I was having a heart attack and I thought I was dying. And we were in the middle of production, and I did not want to upset anybody with my death during production because production was so important. So I got up from my desk and I drove myself to the ER and parked my car where the ambulance is parked, and walked in and said, I'm having a heart attack, I'm dying. And they rushed me back to the EKG machine and they said, lady, you're not having a heart attack, you're having an anxiety attack. And that changed the game for me because then I had to learn how to deal with that anxiety. And the doctors tried to put me on lots of different medications, and I didn't like any of them. And in an offhand comment, my doctor said, well, have you tried cannabis? And for me, as a child who grew up in the 80s in Detroit and listened to Nancy Reagan when she told me to say no to drugs because my brain might fry like an egg, she might as well have been saying to me, have you tried methamphetamines? But I listened to her, and it made me do my research. And it was on two different levels. I needed to do my research on the plant and see how it could help me. But even more so, maybe, I needed to do my research on why I felt so much stigma. And that led me down a whole different path of understanding the war on drugs, understanding Harry Anslinger, who was a man who said, reefer makes darkies think they're as good as white men, and how that played into prohibition. And after I did that work, I understood that cannabis could help me, and I found a regimen that did, but it really empowered me to really want to help other women, and in particular women of color, to be able to use cannabis for health reasons, for medicinal reasons, and also to be able to destigmatize the plant, because I think that that's really important. We don't talk enough about how communities of color who were disproportionately disenfranchised by the war on drugs still have a lot of PTSD about that. And being able to talk to them about the history of cannabis really does destigmatize the plant and allow them to be able to come and get those medicinal benefits.
I mean, your personal story says a lot about everything that you've built, because there is that relationship with cannabis. So from an entertainment production executive to building a badass dispensary, one of the first Black women-owned dispensary in Los Angeles.
Well, we're one of the first that came online. We're the first dispensary to focus on women of color. And I think that that's an important distinction for us, because that is a demographic that really has not been paid attention to. And also, for me, coming from the entertainment industry, one of the things that really spoke to me in coming to this space was the idea of being able to pull into niche markets. My background was building brands. So being able to understand these niche markets, being able to pull into these demos, understand what they want, and be able to give that to them. That's what we did every day. And be able to transfer that knowledge and information into this space was what we really, I think, were trying to accomplish with Josephine and Billie's. What I knew for sure is that this demographic was ignored. I knew that they had a deep need for this plant and this information. And I knew that the broad play that I saw going on with other dispensaries. Everybody wants to be the Apple dispensary. Everybody wants to be the Apple of cannabis. We can't all be broad. Have a position, have a direction. And I thought that this would be an opportunity for us to really pull in to a market and give them what they needed. At this point in time, I mean, you can't even get me to step out of the car at a Target to walk in, much less go in and shop. I'm doing drive up, put it in the back of my car. So how do we really pull into specific markets and get them really engaged without having a position?
Yeah, and I think that authentic message really resonates with consumers, and that's what keeps them going and differentiates, as a lot of dispensaries just keep on popping up. So in Los Angeles.
We are located at 1535 West Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard in beautiful South Los Angeles. We're just south of USC, just outside of downtown LA.
That's a good market. All the college kids, especially on 420, must be popping.
Absolutely.
So you have the flagship, Josephine Billie's.
Yes.
Talk a little bit more about the different assets that you have. Do you have brands, also retail? Like, what are the SKUs that are your bread and butter? And I'm curious about your supply chain. Like, do you own any other assets, or are you mainly brand licensing?
So right now, we are a social equity dispensary, which means in Los Angeles, we have retail and delivery. We have not activated our delivery license yet. In store, we have our own brand that we are white labeling. So we are not vertically integrated yet. We are going after our consumption license at the store. Right now, I think what our brand differentiators are come down to experience. And I think that becomes really important, again, in this market, is that, what do we do to continue to have that same customer come back again and again? What do we do to get that customer to get out of that car and come to us rather than doing delivery? And the difference maker for us is the experiences that they're going to have in that store. It's our push in on education. It's events that we do like Tea and Terpenes, which is our signature educational event where we're going to teach our customer base about the plant, how, about terpenes, about and not just the medicinal side, but also about the history of the plant in order to destigmatize, like we talked about. So we're talking about Harry Anslinger. We're telling them about how in the 1400s, Soylu women were using cannabis in childbirth, and in the 1920s, cannabis was more widely used than Tylenol at that point in time, in order to be able to give that information. It's about, bringing the community together around events like First Sundays, where we're having basically a block party for our community. We're definitely really trying to pull in, to community wellness with events like yoga and Pilates in store, in order to really engage our customer base and have them really feeling like family to Josephine and Billie's, because that is critical to being able to build what we need to build with our store.
So, really unique story, and also relationship with the parent company. Tiffany is here from the parent co representing. So Josephine and Billie's is one of two social equity licensee founders that are part of the parent co's Social Equity Ventures, which is a $10 million fund. We've talked a lot about flagship, but there's always going to be the next stepping stone, which is growth. What does growth look like for you and for the audience? Whitney and I were kind of chatting about what has the audience not heard about yet that we can chat about? And so this idea of, a multi-state operating social equity group. Let's start there.
Absolutely. I mean, we've never intended for Josephine and Billie's to be a single location. Our job was to build a flagship store that proves the concept, that this concept can live as an MSO. And so I think that is ultimately our goal, and to have an MSO that is equity-based. And I think that is a much different concept than having, a traditional MSO who is leveraging equity, than having a equity-based, concept that is then going out to partner with other equity applicants.
So I think a lot of people in the audience know how challenging it is to apply for a license in any given market. You add the layer of social equity in there, let's put like 1,000 times harder. let's kind of play around with this idea. What does a top go for a social equity MSO even look like? Because the structure of ownership in certain markets, for example, like 51% ownership, right, in Massachusetts.
Absolutely. I mean, and to be clear, every social equity does not look the same in different municipalities. Social equity doesn't look the same, in different cities within the same state. And so a critical portion of being able to have a MSO that is going to leverage equity is going to be having a company that's going to be willing to iterate and being able to be flexible to meet where these programs live. And so that's going to be absolutely critical. It's going to be able to have a holding company and being able to understand that we're going to have to meet these programs where they live. And I think that it's going to be our understanding and having operated within these systems, and me not only being, an equity applicant, but also being an advocate who's worked really hard to see programs like this come off the ground, is going to be critical to the understanding and making sure that we're able to leverage this and also to be able to offer fair deals. Because at the end of the day, the dream of equity is not just to have people have an opportunity to participate, is that they are having an opportunity to own business and to have exits and all of these things. And I think that we forget that when we start talking about equity. Some companies look at equity applicants as liabilities, and I think it's important that we have an MSO that looks at them as assets.
I mean, Whitney Beatty is not a liability. She's a baller, and we can see that by firsthand. So, but for all the investors in the audience, so JourneyOne Ventures, we do pre-seed to Series A investments, and then I also wear a different hat on the M&A side at Bowen. But what I found was that it was really difficult to figure out how do you even navigate the investment landscape and what is the right vehicle for social equity type investments. So we have a free resource on our website at JourneyOne.vc, and it's a guide that overlays all the different social equity programs across states and all of the accelerators that empower these businesses. In terms of the next state for you, is it driven by opportunity for a social equity license or a license? Like, what are the top 2 states that are top of mind for you?
I mean,
or does it grow in California?
I would love to see Josephine Billie's in that tri-state area. I'd love to see New York and New Jersey. I think that the joy of California is, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. But I think that it's well known that California has its own challenges. So to be able to grow into other urban markets, we're super excited to take a look at what's happening there. To look at places like New York, New Jersey, looking at places like my hometown, Detroit, Michigan, looking at and having conversations out of Chicago. I think that those markets are definitely ripe for for a brand like Josephine Billie's, because not just the concept, fits with those communities, but it's also our programming is a fit. Our the way that we look at the market is a fit. Our brand inclusivity is a fit. It's all of these things layered on top of each other, which makes us a unique addition to those types of markets.
So the social equity application process in LA was quite difficult. I don't even know.
Understatements.
Yeah, understatement. I'm curious to share a little bit more about that program and what you think is missing for ideal programs. And what is the state that you think has one of the best programs, or counties or cities?
Oh, you've asked a big question, and we have like 6 minutes. So what are we missing in Los Angeles right now? I think that the biggest portion that we're missing in Los Angeles right now, without question, is funding. You cannot gather a group of people that are disproportionately disenfranchised by the war on drugs and give them opportunities for licenses and not give them opportunity to have funding for those licenses. It is a critical issue. Funding is one of the hardest things for people in this space by far, and especially for people of color and women of color. beyond. I mean, we know that VCs are giving 2% of their money to female-led businesses and 0.006%, I think the number was, for women of color. So when we're talking about a venture that is going to take you, somewhere between $1 million and $3 million to get off the ground, and they've offered, grants funding out of Los Angeles was $36,000. What is that covering exactly? Make it make sense. So then you're in a position where you have to have, investors. And unfortunately, what ended up happening with the system that they put in place is that they had 806 people apply. 706 people did not end up getting licenses. Another 100 ended up getting grandfathered in. But then you got 600 people who ended up having investors that got burned by that process. And now they hear the word social equity and they kind of go like this. And they don't want to invest because it becomes something that makes them a little nervous. And so that becomes a huge issue. I think if we're talking about people who are doing their best at social equity, I don't think that we have a perfect program yet. I think it's critical that we continue to iterate, but I think we need to look to Oakland. Oakland was the first program on the table, and I think some of the things that they're doing incredibly well is funding. They're giving loans, they're giving grants, they have shared kitchen projects, they have shared manufacturing projects. They're doing the things necessary in order to let these people get the opportunity to get these businesses off the ground and to build the inclusive supply chain that people are preaching. And I think that is critical to having these programs survive.
Also safe banking, access to small business loans, that affects trickle down to, operators getting off the ground. But I'll be honest with you. So at JourneyOne, we have not invested in a social equity operator yet. We don't really focus on licensed operators. So how we're looking at it is potentially just spinning up an SPV vehicle. I think there's a different return profile for licensed operators. And that's one way for us to get started. So if there are other investors in the room that want to band with me, it's an important initiative that we're focused on. But with the fund's strategy and portfolio, it doesn't really align with what we're looking for in the market. But it doesn't mean that it's not a good investment. It's a different profile. So I think you have to just be creative with that type of stuff, but also funding is a big important thing.
Absolutely, and let's not forget that social equity is a very specific program. Social equity in this iteration is talking about programs specifically at municipalities that are meant to service people who are disproportionately disenfranchised by the war on drugs. That is not synonymous with Black and brown businesses that also need support in this space and also sometimes get confused with equity. Those businesses still, need funding and they do need support within this space. And I think that sometimes people get confused that all Black and brown businesses are not social equity businesses. So that is something that needs some clarification sometimes.
Absolutely. We have a minute left and would love for anybody to hop in with a question before we wrap up. And if not, we can discuss more things. But I mean, Whitney, I'd love for you to give your ask. You have a mic in your hand and lots of people that are like, hey.
Josephine Billie's is always looking for growth, and so we're always looking to meet investors who are interested in being a part of our story. We are, we were named after Josephine Baker and Billie Holiday, two women of color who were persecuted for their cannabis consumption and yet used their art to fight against injustice. They rejected the mainstream and they wrote their own rules, all while holding the door open for other women who would come after. And for us, that is goals AF. If that is goals for you, please come up and talk to me. I would love to talk to you about our
Whitney
future.
Beatty.